Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Douville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is this week digging into his pockets looking for Zuzu's pedals as he sings Auld Lang Syne.
Tim Longo. I don't know the pedals reference. What is...
Have you not seen It's a Wonderful Life? You don't?
Oh, yes. Okay. All right.
Zuzu's pedal. Zuzu's pedal.
Yeah, yeah. That was good.
I just saw it.
You just saw it, yeah. We actually do usually watch it annually, and we just missed it this year. So it was playing at Cinerama, actually.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah.
It planned sort of a date night, but didn't happen. But that would have been fun to see it there.
It was part of my weird emotional whiplash day at the movies. So
that was quite a combo. You should share with the audience.
Share with the audience. I started with Marriage Story, which is on Netflix right now. It's Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson divorce movie from Noah Baumbach, and then it was It's a Wonderful Life, which is kind of like the opposite possible end of that. And then finished off with Die Hard. This was like the day before Christmas, I believe. So I think this was Christmas Eve. It was a good night.
Well, yeah, that was a good combo. All
good
right.
times. Yeah.
Good work.
Anyway, you want to mention briefly a little bit about the music folks heard at the beginning?
I know.
We haven't talked about that yet.
Were people shocked? Did they see that coming? Hear that coming? Amazing! It is the beginning of a new era, and as we have bantered about over the years, Brett and I, and our opinions of our opening music, and my lack of getting off my butt to do anything about it, we had a wonderful Uber fan come to save the day. Aaron Evers, one of our favorites. We have many favorites, but he's one of our favorites. Often does something for the podcast for us over the holidays. And this year he decided to mix it up, and he literally put his money where his mouth is and helped us get an intro by funding it himself. From Kirk Hamilton, a pretty famous composer around. He's done a lot of different things for different mediums as well as games and podcasts. And so he hired him to write an intro and ended up being an outro as well, which you'll hear later for the podcast. So we have a legitimate, written, composed podcast intro for our podcast after almost 4 years.
Composed by a human, not by an algorithm.
Exactly, yes. This is by no means a full judgment on Brett's capabilities of procedurally generating an intro.
He's listening to a website multiple times until he hears one and he's like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Which I think in retrospect is so appropriate anyway. I think that was such a funny kind of like, cool and funny way for us to get one for the podcast, especially coming from a programmer. And
from the designer, of course, we wait and we wait and we wait and we wait. We've done everything we can. Everything's ready for him. And then finally,
somebody else takes
the reins and we get what we
Oh, that's brilliant. That's so funny. I didn't anticipate that joke going that direction, but it came full circle. So, yeah. And so, I had always, bickered about, I'm not a fan of the intro, blah, 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 but I just never did anything else. So thank you, Aaron, so much for a holiday present for us and for the fans. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners are so used to Brett's intro, and being a big podcast listener myself, I know how you kind of get attached to things. So I hope people don't miss that too much. I am really excited about what Kirk put together, and I think it's really amazing, and it's catchy and sticky and fun. And as a bonus surprise, we are going to have him on, which was also Aaron's idea. Aaron's full of them. We're going to have him on in a couple episodes and have him talk about the piece. And we'll probably just kind of talk about game music in general and kind of and hear what some of his favorites are and what his influences have been and stuff. And And Kirk's also has his own. He also has his own podcast, right?
Right. Yes, he actually has two of them. He is
right.
co-host of Kotaku Split Screen, and he has his own. He left Kotaku as a writer / editor in large last year, and went back to full-time work as a musician. He kind of grew up playing a ton of music. Went to a pretty famous high school for music in Indiana. For jazz, of all things, in Indiana. Like, that's just words I don't normally associate together. And now he has a second podcast, which is called Strong Songs. I'm an avid supporter. He has a Patreon and all that stuff. I love it. I don't listen to a lot of music that's not algorithmically generated. No, I'm kidding. I don't listen to a lot of music, period. I tend to like just having podcasts in my ears when I'm driving or something like that. But he breaks down songs and talks about why these particular songs he's chosen are strong. What makes them strong songs that capture some kind of zeitgeist or whatever. I think he's had about 20 or so episodes so far, in addition to some just sort of Q&A ones. So it's probably a little more like 26 or something. It's fantastic. I totally recommend it. I've known Kirk for a while. He was kind of part of the blogosphere back when I started blogging years and years ago now. And that's kind of how he got into Kotaku and ended up spending something like 11 years there. And yeah, so he's been around the scene for a while. And I'm very encouraged to see him back to writing and performing music, because he's a great saxophonist. And of course, that's what I used to play as well. So we're sax brothers.
Sax Brothers, good. Okay, we'll talk more about that when we have him on. Yeah, he's a extremely talented fellow, and it was fun. Mainly, Brett kind of left it to the two of us to kind of carry it across the finish line, and so we had a few calls, and it was fun to just collaborate with him on it. And we gave him some sort of direction, light direction on where to go, and I'll save that for when we have him on, and we'll talk more deeply about it. But we had sort of a bit of a mini vision about what we were looking for. So thank you so much to Aaron and Kirk for finally having we're a legitimate podcast now.
We made 192-ish episodes in. We had a few bonus ones that I didn't number, because why would I do something logical like that? So who knows how many it actually is, but it's around 192 numbered episodes. Let's just call it that. Right.
Yeah. It wouldn't be a real podcast if you couldn't actually count how many episodes you had.
Right.
Like every one I listened to.
Everybody does that. Yeah. At some point they're like, oh, well, this is, such and such A, and then it's all, forget it. You're done.
Right.
It's all over.
So that's what you heard coming in to the podcast. End of a new era, or end of an era and start of a new era for the new year, which brings
perfect for New Year's Day. Yeah.
Yeah. We're recording on New Year's Eve, and we usually do our end of the year sort of retrospective. So yeah, here we are.
Yeah. I probably should have had this up in front of me. We played a whole bunch of games this year, as usual, but I don't have the list in front of me. The first one we played this year was Pokemon, and actually we just finished that this year because it was one we had started. We had started the year prior. It's been an interesting year. We've had a few interviews. I think 5 interviews, if I'm not mistaken. Now I'm wondering if I got that right.
So we got Pokemon, Kingdom Hearts, Diablo, Devil May Cry, Myst, Symphony of the Night, some SNES classic stuff, Doom, Eternal Darkness, World of Warcraft, Shenmue.
Right.
So yeah, interview wise, we have David Brevik on, Robin Miller.
Oh, 4 interviews actually. As it turns
John Romero and Brad Ferminger.
Yeah, no, it was a good year. I actually have tons of things, little clips that I thought of including from just the interviews. Never mind sort of general takeaways or anything like that. So it's despite I think that might be the fewest we've had in a particular year. because in some cases we played games where we just have more connections. And this year we actually played a fair amount of Japanese games, which just make it naturally harder as well.
That's what I was going to say. Is we had a high ratio of that. Half of them are Japanese development, and we've had real trouble getting interviews on for those. But all the Western games, I think we had an interview from. We're not done with Warcraft, so I'm anticipating we will get somebody for that. Maybe multiple people. I have some ideas there. But also we had quite a few bonus episodes, so that extends it too, right? We played Diablo 3, Abduction, Bloodstained, Doom 2016.
Pokemon Let's Go.
Pokemon Let's Go. Yeah, so we it was a full year.
It was.
Playing.
Yeah, no, it was a good year. I enjoyed all of what we played, and of course I got my Kingdom Hearts obsession going this year. So
what's the update on that? Where
I have played up to Dream Drop Distance, which I started but set aside. I have not gone back to that.
Took a drink right before you said that, and I almost spit the all over my
I'm like 8 or 9 games in, but a lot of the games, several of those games were not available. They're just recapped, so they're on in the collection that I purchased for PS4. There's here's a 3.5 hour movie describing the events that happened in this game that was on the Game Boy Advance or something like that years ago. And some of those you actually have to. You won't understand what's going on in the next game if you don't watch some of it, but they're very I would make very different choices in how I edited those together. I think there's a lot of just basically a whole page of stuff where, it's just a frame where you just are watching, you're just sitting there learning that, and here's where a lot of gameplay happened, where there was a lot of repetitive battles. But they just keep doing that. They just keep saying that multiple times throughout this whole movie. It's wild. And then the hero spent hours. It was ridiculous. Yeah, one of them was 2 hours, but altogether it's 3.5 hours of stuff, of recaps of games that I'm not able to play.
Wow. Okay. Well, you're pretty deep in. So are you? But you're not.
I think the next game for me would be Kingdom Hearts 3. So I might get to that in the near future. Yeah, maybe that will be my next game. We were talking pre-show. I've been playing God of War 2018. I've got Persona 5 that I've been streaming and not cheating on. I played a bunch of games here over break, but one of them was God of War 2018, and I could imagine myself next going to returning to Kingdom Hearts so that I could go on to Kingdom Hearts 3. Basically a year after everybody else talked about it. So
that's a long road, though. I'm impressed you're already to 3, or that you made it to 3.
Yeah, just about. I've got that one game, I think, in my way, because I think everything else is not. There's a mobile thing, and there was one that was Japan only. That is not recapped as far as I know. So I think that's it. I think that's what's left is this Dream Drop Distance, and then Kingdom Hearts 3. So just in time for the DLC, Remind.
Oh, right. Exactly. Yep. I heard people talking about that. What a crazy franchise.
Yeah.
I'm just flabbergasted.
Yeah, it was wild listening back to the takeaways episode of that today. So trying to see if there are any gems I wanted to pull out of that one. So
yeah, cool.
Anyway, well, shall we turn to the end of year takeaways?
Let's do it. What
do you have first? What do you want to do first? You want to do your takeaways from interviews, or do you have themes that you want to address first?
I did a little bit different this year. I looked back at the full year, and I think what we usually do is we kind of think about our favorites from particular games we played or whatever, and then interview moments we definitely focus on. And I have some of those too, but yeah, we can bounce around. Maybe I don't want to monopolize, but I do have 3 themes. I looked back at everything over the year and kind of thought about things that came to mind that were sort of again thematic across the set of games we played, and so that was my spin on it this year. So the first one that when I looked at our list, and I remember us talking about many times throughout the year, is sort of a comparison of two different things. And the way I put it down in my notes here is sort of genre definition versus refinement. And we played a set of games that were genre defining games. So things like Pokemon, Diablo, Myst, Doom, and then you could say Shenmue's in there maybe a little bit, though we're not done with that yet. But those first four are good examples of games that really, created something. For the most part, there's a legacy you can pull from in many of those cases too. But we played these particular games because they were the ones that really cemented the genres. And then if you compare that to some of the other games we played, it was interesting for us to talk about things like WoW, Eternal Darkness, and Symphony of the Night, which were taking a genre that was easily, you could say, has been established and had started. Symphony of the Night, I think there is some debate there, but I think the structure of that was really, especially because we played Castlevania 3. Which one was the one we played?
Played Castlevania 4.
Right. Okay. Because we played that first, and I think for me, at the time, I remember us talking about, my shock in what Super Castlevania was, because I had always heard of sort of the Symphony of the Night structure, and Super Castlevania 4 was not that, and so there was a legacy there, and then there was Metroid that had come before all of this, but then Symphony of the Night, I was also caught off guard as an example of the refinement of the genre, in that I think Symphony of the Night is a better Metroidvania than Metroid is, in my opinion.
Ooh, strong opinion.
Yeah, and I reflected a lot on that, and I think we talked about it during the series as well. And as listeners know, I'm a really big Metroid fan. I love that franchise, and the highs are very high. But I feel like Symphony of the Night did some, like WoW for me in MMOs, it did some things with the genre that just really ratcheted it in, and really polished off some of the edges that Metroid, I think, hits often. So for me as a theme, that sort of like the genre defining set combined with the refinement set was really interesting sort of juxtaposition for the year for me. And I really enjoyed playing both types of games. And arguably, I'm sure if I look back at previous years, we do that a lot because we play games that are influential. So I'm sure every year has this theme to some degree. But this year, when I looked at the list, I really kind of dawned on me that comparison was really interesting, at least. So that was my first summary of the theme.
That's pretty good. I'll sort of key off of that because you mentioned Super Castlevania 4. And I think my first theme for the year, and I don't have really three, I really just have this one, I think, but that is the surprises from Japan. I was listening back, to the, I think it's basically the first or the second episode of the year was our end of Pokemon Red Blue cast, and just how much we liked that game. I mean, I think that and Kingdom Hearts, and then the sort of the dichotomy of Super Castlevania 4 and Symphony of the Night, of how different those two games were like the three surprises I'm really talking about, if we don't count Kirby's Golf, which remains my favorite golf game of all time. But no, I mean, I was blown away by how much we both like really latched on to Pokemon Red Blue. I mean, I haven't gone and played a bunch of others or anything like that, like I have with Kingdom Hearts, which is the separate surprise, because of course I didn't really care for that game when I played it first quite some time ago. And now I'm however many games and hours of recaps into the whole franchise. So that is another surprise. And then, that surprise of like, oh, wait a minute, Castlevania, the Metroidvania structure that we think of that it's part named for, is not what it was before this point. That's sort of like, like if you only knew Zelda, the 3D Zeldas, you might be very surprised by Zelda, the second Zelda game or something like that. It was this same sort of surprise, like, oh, I didn't know this about its history. So those are a few surprises I had through the year, and that's really kind of my pleasant surprises. I guess I do have a second theme there, but go ahead with your second one.
Yeah, my second one, I don't spend too much time on, but the other thing that I remember across the year that I know I talked a lot about, and and I naturally talk a lot about level design throughout all of our years of the podcast, almost 4 years, and so I have a lot of opinions, and I love analyzing level design specifically. But this year in particular, the theme that I wanted to pull out was actually world design. And it's really important to think about those very differently. Sometimes people glom them together and they really shouldn't, in my opinion. And so looking back at the year, when you look at games like Pokemon, Symphony of the Night, Myst even, and WoW, of course, world design and the structure of actually the macro aspects of how the world is put together and how it flows is really critical to those games. And I think that especially in Pokemon's case and all 4 of those games that I mentioned, that they created a structure that became blueprints for a lot of games after them. Not just Pokemon games being made by the same company making more Pokemon games, but Pokemon as a structure, and sort of that sense of progression and how you're moving through the world, still linear, but it was just a really well put together world. And I remember in a lot of the series talking about at least my delight and surprise in some of the structures of these worlds being so well done, and the way that you flow between sections, and even revisiting, which often can be seen as a negative when you're retreading territory you've been to before, looking at something like Symphony of the Night. And again, I think really using that Metroidvania structure well and not feeling like I was very rare in that game where I felt like I was retreading territory because they just wanted me to burn the hours. It felt fairly motivated. I had some new tool when I was coming back, and that structure. I think I might have probably mentioned Alex Noisy, a friend of ours, another developer. It's one of his favorite games of all time. And I can kind of now see what he always was saying with that game, because it's really the world structure itself, I think, is what really made that game for me, because it's so well done. So yeah, the role of world design in games this year really stuck out to me as another theme.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I noticed that too, and actually I have some specific level design quotes and things like that in my notes from the year that we may get to. We haven't actually talked about what our interview takeaways are, but I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, that came through multiple times, and in some very specific ways. And like I'm thinking particularly of Eternal Darkness and Doom, most recently of like what that meant, like world design through the level design versus world design through returning to a space and things like that. I mean, just different ways of designing these worlds, in some cases for production reasons or what have you. But yeah, super, super interesting theme. I guess my second one would be the rabbit holes I went down this year. As I look at past years, and I mean, we've already talked a little bit about Kingdom Hearts and given an update there, but that's one many hour rabbit hole. I also went into a deep Myst rabbit hole after we played that. I played all of Abduction, which is Cyan's most recent game, the one that was a VR first, I believe, and then became a standard PC title, as well as playing Riven and Myst 3, and I think Myst 4 I had trouble with, and I think there was technical issues, so that's where it basically ended for me. But that's way more Myst than I ever thought I would play again in my life. And now, of course, we're playing World of Warcraft, so there's a third rabbit hole.
Oh my goodness, you've fully fallen down. You could say you fell down a manhole.
Oh wow, that's an interesting callback there, my friend. Wow, well done.
Thank
yes.
you.
I
I
felt
don't get them as often as you, but when I get them,
that's good. I like that very much, very much.
Yeah, and WoW. I don't even talk about your rabbit hole with WoW. It's I don't know what to say about it. You're fully over the top there.
Yeah, I mean
myself.
it's funny though. It's because I look back at prior years, and even though I've played other games in all, basically all of these different sort of series that we've played, in no prior year did I go and then play an additional game in those series, or sort of related to the games we played, kind of immediately following. Arguably, I would say Eco and Shadow of the Colossus, where I played a whole bunch of that kind of beyond. But this year, to have 3 games that launched me into sort of many, many, many hours of additional play is a definite rarity and a theme from this year for myself, anyway. So,
why do you think the Myst rabbit hole in particular? Do you have any thoughts about why that stuck with you? Because we talked a lot about Kingdom Hearts specifically and such, but what about Myst?
Well, one of the things that I tend to forget that I really enjoy is just plain puzzles. I mean, I do the crossword puzzle every day or whatever, but to have a puzzle environment like that's both a world and a puzzle or a series of puzzles is just really, really satisfying to me. Over break here, I've played 3 short puzzle games, relatively short puzzle games: Lara Croft Go, Return of the Obra Dinn. Actually, I guess it's really just 2 puzzle games, because the other one's not really a puzzle. It's just find all the paths, but it was a kind of a fun short game. Burly Men at Sea. Burly Men at Sea. It's really just recognizing the branch points, and keeping track of them all in your head. But yeah, I mean, it was just like I had forgotten how much I enjoyed that sort of thing, because I tend to play so many just sort of third-person action adventure with a story type games, right? AAA, check off all the boxes games, which sounds more dismissive than I mean it to be. It's just it's the way I like to just sort of sit back and not be too overwhelmed. It's my escapist entertainment. So yeah, that's definitely a thing for me. Is I just playing Myst and having to figure out all those puzzles again. And knowing that they'd get better at it as well, especially playing Abduction as a bonus, going, oh man, this has gotten a lot better, though still recognizably, in the lineage. I mean, I love that game so much. I had so much fun with that game, that I just wanted to keep playing more things like it. So that was definitely a big reason why.
Cool. Yeah. Makes sense.
And why, of course, it's just because it's digital cocaine, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. And the funny thing about WoW, which I'm not trying to encourage you to play modern, but I think you would enjoy it. But you've fallen down the deep rabbit hole with classic, which is, it's still, and we'll talk more about this in the future, but I'm still impressed with how classic holds up, despite modern having gone so much further into the future when it comes to usability. But you're playing classic down the rabbit hole. So like the arguably the hardest way to play WoW, you've fallen down with whatever 4 or 5 characters. So that's impressive.
Or distressing. Could
or distressing. Yeah, true.
Yeah. Little column A, little column B.
Need to see somebody about that. So yeah, my last theme for the year, I put down as sort of a silly way to say it, overly complicated way to say it, but cohesive, holistic game design. I feel like really hit with me this year too, and I think I tend to talk about this a lot on the podcast. I really appreciate when that happens. In the sort of mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics side of theoretical side of game design, I think I really love games the most when they use all 3 of those really heavily together, and really make that there isn't one really that is losing out to the trilogy of those 3 things, those 3 aspects, and and if you look at something like Symphony of the Night this year, I would even put Eternal Darkness in that, because I think, though not very systemic, I think a lot of the mechanical aspects and spell systems and things like that really all worked well together with the fiction of the world and structure of the world and why you were doing what you're doing. And then I would also put Doom in there as another example, especially for being a genre-defining game, of having a really cohesive, holistic game design, kind of a, as a package. And I was just looking back at our list and just realizing, like, we played some games that really, for me, hit that really hard. And it felt, I just love when it's just so holistically put together and things just make sense. And different games come at that and arrive at that in different ways. And we luckily in two of those cases, we were able to talk to people about how they got there a little bit. But despite how they got there, the end result for me was just good cohesion. And it's really difficult to do that. It's really rare to do that. And it's really rare to have sort of all the three different aspects of game design be so represented. And you could say, and again, the reason that aesthetics is one of the three is I don't necessarily mean story. So in Doom's case, there isn't a lot of fiction and story there, but the world building, I think, was there. Even in something as simple as the way they textured the levels, and stuff. And there was definitely thought behind it. And so that was my last theme, is just thinking about how some of the games we played this year had that theme of cohesive, holistic game design.
Okay. Well, I have one last one too, and that's what a weird thing it is to have streamed basically every hour of these games this year. I think there were a couple episodes of Doom where I couldn't do that for whatever reason. I just needed to sort of play quickly, and because of when we were recording, I was out in Seattle. I was on Bainbridge that month when we were doing that.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there was a time when I was coming back from a trip. I'm like, oh my God, I got to play these levels so we can talk about it tomorrow night or whatever, or even that same night. I can't recall, but other than that, I'm pretty sure I played all of this on stream this year. A little bit of Bloodstained too, I think, is one that I did not play much on stream. If I played any of that on stream at all, I think I had to fit it in the mornings before work. But other than that, this is all stuff I played on stream. In addition to all of my missed additional play, and some WoW, not all of the WoW. Some of the WoW has been on stream as well. Not when we've played co-op, but other than that, yeah. So this is the first year I've done that. It's been kind of spotty in years past. This year I didn't really specifically make a commitment. I just was like, well, I'm playing them anyway. I might as well try to schedule my life around it a little bit more. And I did, and I ended up spending all that time, and it's been really fun to have, I never have a huge audience because I'm not playing, I don't know, Fortnite or whatever. I'm playing games that are, a decade or more old, usually quite a bit more than a decade old. And folks aren't interested in that, but I do have some listeners who drop in and some regulars basically who are there playing, just chatting with me while I play these things. We just chat about whatever really, but yeah, that's been a lot of fun and been a fun sort of addition to the podcast for me over the past year. So
yeah, I actually think about that a fair amount because as probably the listeners knows, and as you know, I've never streamed anything, and it's just such a foreign concept to me still. Yes, I'm an old grumpy man, but I think about like you streaming when we play, and I don't know if I've ever even asked you this. I feel like I should have. How does it change the way you play, or like what impact does streaming have? Because I have this sort of weird fear that it'll change how I'm experiencing things, not in a bad way. And I'm not saying it's a negative thing that you're streaming all the stuff, but I'm just wondering, does it have any, because there's a social aspect, of course, to streaming. I've watched streams, but I haven't, done them myself. I mean, is there other aspects that kind of impact how you're playing the games or enjoying the games?
I wouldn't necessarily say so. I mean, it does mean I'm tending to play them in a more focused way, in the sense of playing it at a specific time and knowing I'm going to take notes and sort of like just kind of all the stuff around it, rather than just kind of dropping onto my couch and playing for 40 minutes. I'm actually playing long sessions of these games, rather than kind of breaking things up. And I'm lucky that I can fit that into my schedule, right? This is probably why, the last couple of years are probably the first time that I've been able to do that in my life, just because, my kids played sports and things like that. And it was very rare to have a Sunday or a Saturday that I had 5 or 6 hours free. So it's been that, I think, is probably the biggest change, is that I'll sit down and play 5 hours of, Shenmue or something like that, or, Eternal Darkness or what have you. So that's been fun. There is a sort of, I do feel like my skill at games naturally degrades because my attention is somewhat split. So there's definitely an aspect, and there were definitely times where I just kind of like have to, especially with Devil May Cry, and maybe Super Castlevania 4, where it's like, okay, I need to just focus. Like, I'm not going to look at the chat until there's a cutscene for a while here, folks. Because the games are tough enough that I can't, I can't do it. But other than that, no, I mean, I don't think it's changed too dramatically. Yeah.
There's no sense of sort of performance to it because you're...
No, I mean, some games I can be goofier than others. Like Shenmue doesn't have a lot of... I mess up the QuickTime events a lot. There are some weird audio quirks with the way I stream. There's a little bit of lag. So sometimes the audio is off and it throws me off. There's been games where I've been... Well, it's just like a 2-second difference or something when I hear the audio versus when... because I'm more in sync with when the stream is going out or something like that. I'm not sure why that happens, but it does, because I'm listening through headphones. I'm hearing through the recording of it, or the streaming software, OBS. So that can be a thing. There's definitely been games I've played, not so much for the cast, but where the fact that the audio was off. Devil May Cry actually was one where I had to take the headphones out, turn up my TV so I could actually hear it in sync. Because there would be times, and there's been other games that have had like rhythm sections where it's like impossible to play, a rhythm game without being able to hear the music on the beat. There's a section in Sly Cooper where that happened, where I was like, I actually have to hear the TV. But in general, there's not, it's more just I'm kind of, I might talk to myself more than I would talk to myself, right? I'm not just sitting there kind of, I am sort of talking about what I'm seeing or playing or making jokes about Rio or what have you. But no, I wouldn't say it's dramatic. I mean, it's more a vocalization of what might be going through my head anyway. So I'm just speaking it out loud, and I don't have to feel bad about that because people are watching. Whereas if, normally I would just be doing that at home, and speaking to myself out loud would seem a little strange. So.
Or not.
Who is anyone to judge? You can't judge me.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, that's pretty impressive to do it for the whole year. So
yeah. I've played a lot of games off. I played all of like Dragon's Dogma on stream. I played some Final Fantasy 13 too. Like there's been a ton of other games. All those other Myst games, Riven, and those were probably the toughest to play on stream. Because it takes a certain amount of concentration of just like, trying to figure things out and remember what I've seen, but also be talking, and that was probably the ones that take the more brain power are probably the hardest from that standpoint. So, yeah. So
cool.
All right.
You're finally.
Yep.
We're so old sometimes.
I know.
This whole topic, probably a lot of the audience was just like shaking their heads, like, what are these guys talking about?
Yeah,
people have been streaming for years. Anyway, Yeah. So should we move on to sort of interview memorable moments?
Let's talk some memorable moments. I actually have them. Some of mine are grouped into themes, so they'll be kind of like there might be a couple of clips, and I'll try to pull those out. But what do you have for your first memorable moment?
Yeah, these are. I don't think I put these in chronological order. So they're in no particular order. I was just sort of bouncing around, and this one I think we probably both share. But it's Robin Miller during our Mist interview talking about, and you actually refer to it often in other episodes because it sort of applies to various sort of mentalities. But the first time that they saw the world of Mist being rendered, as they were sort of watching the renderer create the world from the wireframe into coming into being, I thought was just a magical. Because it spawned sort of conversation for the three of us to talk about this concept of seeing digital worlds, that have interactive elements to them come into being, and that's sort of in a way that's sort of the crux of all of this. It's like creating these worlds that you want people to be fully immersed in and fully, just devoted to for a couple hours or what have you, and as developers, we get to see the first of those, and a game like Myst being such a significant game, and then hearing Robin talk about the first time that they got to see that was really, really magical.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually was in my first themed group of these, which was I just called Seeing Things for the First Time. Robin's quote was, "I am the first person to see Mist Island." And that was pretty amazing. Both you and I are Tolkien fans, and I can remember, when I was a kid learning that he thought, J.R.R. Tolkien thought of himself as writing down the stories of a place that existed, right? And there's a way that's literal for us, in games, that we literally get to see them and see them move and things like that. But it tied back to my childhood in that way. The other two things that I had in that were in David Brevik's interview about Diablo, was the first time he saw his dude walk over and hit a skeleton, and just how excited 20 something years later, 24 years later, I think we are, that he was. And so I'll run both of those clips here.
I am the first person to see Mist Island, or this point of view of Mist Island. Yeah. And it really felt like that. It really was this magical feeling. And that happened again and again and again. And I remembered that this like, like with shivers almost, just like, I was seeing into these places, and I knew so many other people would, and it was just like really magical and great.
I clicked on the skeleton, and the character walked over there and swung and broke the skeleton apart, and it felt so good. And it was just like this amazing epiphany, and it was if like the clouds had parted and the sun came down through my office window and the angels sang. It's like, oh my God, this is so amazing. This is so much better than I ever thought or could ever even imagine that this would ever be. We are never going back to turn-based. This is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I had one other little one, which was John Romero talking about seeing horizontal scrolling and how that basically led him to, start a company that became id Software so they could make Commander Keen games. But that was sort of, that's a little harder to pull out because of John's conversational style, which is to say hummingbird. But yeah, I mean, that was the third of my trio, but I knew Mist Island. I'm the first person to see Mist Island would be one we both picked up on. So yeah, what was, we'll call that our first. What was your second?
Well, speaking of John, his interview was something else in its entirety. We talked about that in the episode and after the episode, etc. So I won't rehash that. So it was really hard to think about which ones really stuck with me. And I didn't get a chance to go back and listen to the whole episode to pick out the specific ones. But the one story that still blows me away, and I even just kind of anecdotally tell friends and stuff after the fact, who hadn't listened to the episode, was when he talked about, and I'm going to butcher it. You're going to have to tell me the technical jargon of it. But when he talked about crafting that cable adapter,
I also picked this one out. Yeah,
that he needed to that didn't exist, so he could transfer data from one computer to another, two different computer types, basically, right?
Yes.
Was it Commodore to from
an Apple to a Commodore? Yeah. Here, let's actually let John tell you about it.
Okay.
And so I'm like, there's nothing to transfer data between these two computers. You can't use disk drives. They're totally different formats. There's no cable to go between them. So I went to Radio Shack and I got a phone cable, that's 4-wire phone cable, got a soldering iron, got got one of the Commodore joystick port things, and I got a 16-pin IC chip that goes inside of a socket in the Apple II, and soldered up a cable, and then programmed the cable. So one line was ground, one was signal, and 2 were data. And then I coded on the Commodore, on the shitty calculator key Commodore keyboard, programmed the receiving code. And then on the Apple II, on the really nice Apple II GS, 3.5 megahertz GS, I programmed the Apple II transmitter code. Joysticks don't send data out. They only take data in. So the Commodore could not say, oh, I got the data. So I had to time it as to send data as fast as it could before it got garbagey. So I was basically shifting bits on the Commodore. I'm looking for a bit, and when it's on, I take the 2 bits, I shift them into a byte, and I just fill memory that way. And that's how and then after that worked, then I sent a real program. Then I wrote the real thing, sent itself over the line, and then it replaced itself with a full program that could actually, know where to save it in memory and on disk and all that kind of stuff. So I wrote this transfer stuff in probably a couple weeks, 2 weeks, and I got a raise because it was amazing. So I went up to $26K, and that cable is in the Origin Museum now.
So yeah, there he is, kind of describing at what lengths developers will go to, specifically him, who is one of the craziest developers that I've ever talked to. Yeah. His obsession and just his passion. And
I see what you did there too. Lengths, like a length of cable.
There you go.
Yeah, so nice. What you did there.
So well done. Hair, maybe, too. Oh no, he cut his hair. So. Didn't he cut his hair? Anyway,
not recently.
So what's your next one? Which I think is also a John one.
Yeah, I'll take another one from John since we're talking about him. The one I expected you to take, I had actually written down the museum, the cable. I put it as the museum cable. It's a cable that's in Origins Museum.
Even crazier.
Was him talking about how he came up basically with the level design aesthetic of Doom, and that was, well, let's have him talk about that as well.
While making the Doom levels, I was like, if any room in Doom could have been in Wolfenstein, you fucking failed. You need to make rooms that could never exist in Wolfenstein as a baseline. And so that was the important rule to transfer to Quake. Every room in Quake cannot have been made in Doom.
Yeah, so I really like that. I mean, that's, like I said, it's funny we're crossing over. You did the cable one that I expected I'd have to pull out, and I had written down the level stuff for Doom because at the time you were just like, oh man, that's amazing! Like what a great rubric to have, right? Like how do you come up with your visual design language, and in some case, like you were talking about earlier, your world building. And they did it in reference to their earlier game. No simple rectilinear wall rooms, right? If it's an angle you could see in Wolf 3D, it can't be in our game. It's pretty simple and straightforward, and it communicates exactly like lean on the tech to do what the tech can do that we couldn't do before. And then they carried that forward, which is another thing he mentioned. So,
yeah.
Do you have another one?
No, not from John. I'll move on. You want me to?
Yeah.
The next
from wherever. Yeah.
So the next one, I had 2 from Dave Brevik, and I don't think he talked about them close together, so I don't think it would be caught into one quote because they're sort of similar. But I'll start with one, and maybe just we can focus on that one, and then maybe we get to the other. But and he told the story of sort of the progression for them going from turn-based to real-time with Diablo. And in a way, that's sort of the crux of the whole game and the genre definition that game created is that decision. And he did discuss sort of that moment when they were debating that with Blizzard and just amongst themselves, what they were going to do there, because it started off as a turn-based game. So that was just a revelatory, and he's talked about that in various other places, but on the podcast, it was fun to talk to him directly just about that, about Diablo going real time.
Great. That's this one. I actually will follow up with kind of how that works into a theme of mine, but let's hear David first, and then we'll get to mine.
We started working on this, and it was going really well. And they came to us and said, "We want you to be real time." And I was really upset about this. I said, "No way, we're never making this the real time." Because one of the things about it was also permadeath, the original Diablo pitch, because all of these rogue games like Angband, Moria, etc. Rogue, these are all permadeath games, and so one of the things that really made the game exciting and compelling, in my opinion, was the fact that it was turn-based, and it was like, oh my God, I'm getting down to my last few hit points here on my character. What do I do? What do I have in my inventory? Do I drink this potion? I don't even know what it is. Or do I try and read a scroll and hope that, I get buffed enough, or that, you've been working on your character for a week and it's, oh my God, you got to get away, you step up, get away from the computer, walk around, say, oh my God, what am I going to do? And you had all these kind of exciting decisions because it was a life or death thing. And one particular movement or one particular thing could be life or death. And it was so
you
hung on this balance.
What you're saying is you were already grognard captured.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
you had not only drunk the Kool-Aid, you had made your own Kool-Aid and then a backup Kool-Aid, and you were all set to
absolutely.
go.
Absolutely. I was just inviting people to my Kool-Aid stand. And it was and so it was a real, there was a real tension about it that I didn't think could be captured in real time.
Yeah.
And because the decisions come so fast, if it's real time, they don't, you can't, if you die from a hit or whatever, it's like it's too fast for you to really kind of have these kind of sit down thinks about how to make this happen. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, my computer went to sleep for a second. And so I said, well, what are we going to do here? And everybody else in the office, a lot of people were like, oh no, we've got to change this to real time. Real time's the future, right? That's the old past. You can do it the crappy old way or the cool new way.
Right.
And this is very much like their real-time strategy. Real-time strategy was going through the change from turn-based to real-time with Warcraft 1 and Dune 2000 and a few others, Command and Conquer and the like, and things like that were all around this time. And so it was like this big evolution in strategy gaming. And so they wanted the same kind of thing out of RPGs. And so they said, oh, you should do this. Oh, I don't think that we will. I'm not in favor of it. And then we talked about it, and they kept bugging us about it. And then finally it came down to a lot of people in the office really wanted this as well. And I said, all right, fine, we'll bring it to a vote. So we all got together, the whole company got together in the kitchen, and we had a vote. And I was outvoted.
Wow.
And I said, okay, fine. Well, it's going to take a while to do this, but, everybody has spoken. We're going to give it a try. If it sucks, we're going to go back to the other way, but it won't, but we will at least give it a good try here.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I had that, like I said, grouped in with something else, but you had another Breivik quote, which also relates to mine. So why don't we get that one too? Can you set it up?
Yeah, to set it up, the other category that he talked about of sort of the addition, and I think it was actually a mandate from Blizzard to, it might have been Mordheim, to add multiplayer, or that there needed to be a multiplayer aspect to the game, and that was actually going to be critical, because Dave talked a fair amount about sort of like their legacy of making single player, RPGs, and that's what they wanted to do, and then how important multiplayer ended up becoming, and that was another genre defining aspect of that game. And it also led eventually to the necessity of BattleNet, which also changed the industry in many ways. So that was another one for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely a goal for Blizzard. And so they said, we're going to make this multiplayer. And, from the very beginning, it was one of the things that they wanted, those were the two things. It should be real time. It should be multiplayer. And they talked to us about multiplayer earlier, and we're like, yeah, multiplayer. Yeah. Okay. And so, and then it kept going on, and it's, multiplayer. Okay. Yeah. Multiplayer. Yeah. Sure. Multiplayer. So like 6 months before we were going to release the product, they're like, okay, now multiplayer, we got to get this running. But we also have this other idea. Okay. Hear us out. We're going to invent this thing. It's going to be called battle.net. Mm-hmm. And what we're going to do is we're going to allow people to play the game sort of like, we're going to come up with our own service. At the time, there was this another one of these things. A popular one was called Total Entertainment Network, 10.
Yeah, I remember.
And you could go on there and play, Doom or Quake with your buddies and things like that. Everybody could link. It was like a hub to meet other gamers and hook up and play multiplayer games. And we're going to come up with our own service called BattleNet, and you won't need to go to one of these services at all. And you'll be able to play with other people. And it's just kind of a chat room where people can meet, and then we'll send them off into a game or whatever. And I said, oh, multiplayer.
So, yeah, I mean, if they hadn't taken that directive and gone after that, I think, Diablo and I think action RPGs in general would be much, much different for the medium. So what was your next one that sort of builds upon that?
Yeah, I had put these, the real time bit, and this next quote from Robin Miller as, sometimes publishers are right, because Robin had gone into Myst thinking, well, this is all about being in the first person and it being a real place, and therefore you could obviously not have music.
It was part of our philosophy about the game. It was going to be a truthful experience, a real experience for the player. It was you personally, you in this world.
Yeah.
And we didn't want anything to break the believability of the world. So if you walk into a dark, cave or something, and music starts playing, well, that's not what it's like in a real place.
Right.
And instead, there should be a wind or, whatever sound effects are in that place, and it should be whatever is there to make the world more believable. And that's the direction we were going with everything. And Broderbund, the company Broderbund, came to us and said, look, we're going to hire a composer to put some music in here. Uh-oh. And that really scared us because, this was our baby at this point, and we didn't want another composer writing music that would damage our baby. And so we were like, no. We'll try some music. And, and then we'll just see if it works. And we were kind of convinced we're going to do the best job we could, and we're going to prove to them it didn't work. Right. So we tried some music and we put it, I think the planetarium was the first place I wrote some music.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, oh, okay. Yeah.
They worked. Proved it to you.
Right. So.
Yeah, so I just thought it was funny because we, even back at the time, I remember how much we demonized publishers. And, in these two games, you actually have another one coming up that's actually pretty relevant. Maybe we actually tie it in together as being when the publisher was right. You want to set that one up too?
Yeah, I think one thing we were hoping about with Brad Firminger's interview was, we wanted to hear sort of the Nintendo perspective, because that Internal Darkness was very uniquely developed because they were so integrated, and they had essentially first party support from Nintendo, including Miyamoto himself. And so he shared a quote / direction from Miyamoto that he gave the team. Brad did, and I don't remember I might have butchered the exact quote, but it was something like, "You need to find keys that aren't keys," and that was, so Yoda-like in the way that he said it, and it's the kind of thing you expect Miyamoto to say, and you want him to say, and the cool thing about that quote for me when Brad said it was, I could see that very clearly in the game. Mm-hmm. Play the game, that he gave them that feedback and that direction, and they did implement that, with the way they used the spell system to open doors and things like that. It was basically a game of just locks and keys the whole time, but they did find other ways to make something into a key that wasn't typically a key.
We got a lot of great feedback that really helped improve the game. One of the things being an email we got from Shigeru Miyamoto that simply said, "You need keys that aren't keys." And we all looked at each other and said, "What?" Like, what is this? And fortunately, we had a couple of people from Nintendo who had come and stayed in St. Catharines for several months to kind of be there as a point person and help us through some of the mysteries of working with Nintendo. And they said, this is a classic Miyamoto feedback, almost in the line of the whole, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him to fish, you feed him his whole life. So they said, he can tell you what he wants you to do, but you do it because he said so. He's trying to get you to step back, look at your game, try to figure out where he's coming from and solve his riddle. And then you will see the problem for yourself. And that will stay with you. And it definitely did, because we looked at the game, and at the time, I think we had, 12, 15 keys or something like that. We were using that same key and lock mechanic all over the place.
Yeah, I knew you were going to pick that one, so actually I already have that one, that time noted down, because I did listen to all the interviews again, and some of the takeaways episodes, just to kind of refresh my memory, especially the older ones. And as soon as I hit that one with "you need keys that aren't keys," I said that is the most Tim Catnip thing I think that's ever been said on the show.
Yeah, couldn't believe it, especially because it, like I said earlier, it was seen in the game. You could see that direction in the game.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we talk about, I don't think I'll be able to include all of it, but that actually goes to some specific examples in the discussion. Some things we ended up with 2 keys or whatever. And sorry if I'm repeating, because I don't remember exactly how long the clip is. But yeah, it's terrific stuff, and one of their keys is even a red herring, and it's very funny. It's great stuff. I'm going to finish off with one that is really about game development, and it also has a couple of quotes. I found a lot of things that were sort of themes. And this one was to be prepared for the tedium of being a game developer. In the case of Robin Miller, that had to do with performance and making 3D when Myst, came out back in 1993 or 4, and how ill-prepared machines were for that, and how long it would therefore take. And then also Brad again talking about how sometimes there's just a lot of tedium in game development. Here are those.
My first actual hands-on job was taking levels for 2 Human that had been built in our proprietary editor, and every asset was all dropped into basically one big space, and the game engine couldn't handle it, so we had to break up into smaller rooms. So I would drag an asset from one list to another and wait about 5 minutes for the list to refresh. And I did that all day. And I remember going home and going, what have I gotten myself into? This is not the glamorous exciting job I thought it would be.
Is because I just didn't think it would be able to handle it.
Yeah.
And in a way, it couldn't handle it. Even like to redraw wireframes, it would take 2 minutes to redraw a wireframe of an image.
Oof.
And to render an image sometimes would take 6 hours.
Yeah.
Or 8 hours. And, and even what we ended up doing, like if we set the camera to look north, we would set the viewfinder, and in Stratavision, for example, or most other programs, you can see what the viewfinder is seeing. You can see the lines that kind of show you exactly where the viewfinder sees.
Mm-hmm.
We would have to go in and hide every single other object. In wireframe mode.
Yeah, just to prevent the culling cost or whatever. Yeah.
Yes, right. And then that's how we would render, and that's actually how we would work.
Yeah, I mean, it is a funny theme, and it's a good theme, and it is funny that it came up a couple different times, because game development is mysterious to a lot of people, and I think romanticized, obviously, too. So it's good. It's a good reminder, And Robin's quote about sort of machines being ready, like that still can be a thing today. I mean,
sure.
Build times on some cases and some engines, are still very tedious and frustrating. So it's not like more powerful machines has helped things. We just find ways to fill the machines more quickly now.
Yeah. Absolutely. Stuff. Yeah. I mean, I remember also, another thing that came up, and I'm not going to put in the quote here, but, John Romero was talking about how they use the next step machines as their, these next operating system machines as their level editor, and how they could do multi-user level editing, and just like how easy that was. It was just because, it was just built into the operating system to be able to listen to objects. Like the technical details aren't important, but it's kind of interesting how there is there's a fine line there of like, sometimes you can get a lot out of what you have as well, but you need the right people to know to take advantage of it. And I think that was an interesting thing with John in particular, is that he is a designer and he's a programmer, and he often knows like how to take advantage of those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny. I also thought it was good to balance out, since we started out with the exciting things, like seeing things for the first time, against, but a lot of the time it's just work. A lot of times our jobs are just work. And it's work we love to do, but every job has times when you're like, oh man, I can't believe I have to do this another 1,000 times before we ship, whatever that might be. So, game development.
Yep.
I had a few others that I won't put in as quotes. I had gifts to gamers. We had talked a little bit about Sigil and what an unusual thing that was. How he came to make a game that whatever 5th chapter of Doom. I don't know if you know this, Tim, but that's actually going to be included in the.
Just going to say,
yeah, they're bundling it in with the Doom packet, anniversary editions that have just come out on the consoles. Like I think basically all the modern consoles, I think, probably have this now. They re-released Doom for console this year, and they're adding Sigil in, which is great because it fits right in.
Yep.
So that was really terrific. The other quote I had in there was Brad Furminger had talked about making games to share with other people. That part of what we do, why we do what we do, is that we are trying to share our art with other people, and that might have been the source of some of the diversity in Eternal Darkness of characters and such, which was something we talked about quite a lot.
Yeah, that was a good topic he brought. Yeah, that was a good.
So those are a couple gaming gifts, aside from the usual obvious ones of just games themselves. Yeah, and along the same line, I had David Brevik say, he at some point said we erred on the side of being generous. I think it had to do with multiplayer and how buggy that was, and he just said, yeah, if there was a bug, we just like made sure everybody got the object or the money or whatever. So that was another one. And then the final thing I guess I would throw out there would be letting your freak flag fly. by which I mean incorporating your particular interests into your game. I think there's a number of places where that kind of comes through when John talks about meeting Adrian Carmack and them being into metal, which he identified Adrian Carmack as because he had long hair of a particular kind, I guess. I don't know. And of course you see their sort of aesthetic influences into Doom as far as them being into metal. But also Robin Miller talked about, Mysterious Island, this Jules Verne novel being kind of the basis of where that game came from, and indeed even its name. So there's just a lot of that coming through as well, over the past year. It's true of Diablo 2 to some degree, but mostly in the wrong ways, because it was originally going to be a graphical roguelike.
Right.
It was going to be the turn-based, as we've already talked about, the sort of turn-based single player, slow, fraught with death game that probably would have helped cement the end of the RPG back in 1994. So we're lucky it didn't go that way.
Those are good.
Yeah, thank you. And yours were good as well. Oh, I do have one other one, and actually I might put in these quotes as well. Maybe I'll put in after the outro. But this was a personal one for me. I called the theme, and it was twice, but it was being told off by legends. I had Robin Miller telling me, "I beg to differ, Brett." I don't know if you remember that in the conversation, but there was a point at which I was like, I could see where you get that, and I don't think it's terrible. And he was like, I beg to differ. And then John Romero setting me straight about the capabilities of the Apple II as well. As I wasn't entirely wrong. My memory is not as good as John, what with his hyperthymesia. So it was I did not remember the particulars of how I was doing some graphics type stuff on the Apple II Plus, and he knew, and he set me straight. So that was also a treat.
Awesome. Those are good, like post outro, like
here's people telling me off.
It was a good year. Good year.
I can use that in the future. Like anytime I disagree with a programmer and it turns out I'm wrong, I can say, I've been told I'm wrong by better programmers than you. So,
good. Oh, good. Well, that's another a dual purpose.
Yeah, I got to keep that in my back pocket.
There you go.
Anyway, well, it's been a great and fun year for us. And we appreciate it. It's always fun for us to kind of look back and reflect. I love listening to these again. I mean, this is like the fourth time I've heard all these things, but it's still fun for me to, especially the interviews, to hear again. So I would steer people back if they've been tantalized by any of these bits back to them and haven't had a chance to listen, because they're just, it's fascinating for us, obviously, because it's what we do, and these are games that we enjoyed playing, and it's fun to talk with the people who worked on them. So.
Yeah. And I hope people really do, even if you don't have time to listen to all of our episodes, like the interviews should really, especially if you've played the game, but even if you haven't, like, I think we probably say this every year, but the delight and surprise that we get from the interview episodes is sort of beyond our expectations, I think, for the podcast in general. We knew we wanted to do something like that, and we've been very lucky with the people we've gotten on, but they just always exceed expectations. And I want to also thank again Aaron Evers and Kirk Hamilton, especially Aaron, for his great gift to all of you, for the music you've heard in the intro and we'll hear in the outro. We're all grown up now for the podcasting world, and I think it's great.
I'll start playing it here as we do our typical stuff. You can find the podcast online at devgameclub.com. We're not reading any of the feedback this week, but you can send us reviews on Apple Podcasts. That's super helpful for us to reach new listeners. Apparently, that's still about 50% of the podcast listening audience, believe it or not. So it's great to get those and have the opportunity to read them out loud here on the show, or sing them, should you put in a singing review. Been a while since we've had one of those, so it might be time. Or, of course, you can send feedback with your questions and thoughts or what have you to devgameclub@gmail.com. We are continuing to play Shenmue. We should be finishing that, in theory, for next week. How's that going?
Oh, it's swimmingly.
Yeah. You haven't played it since before break. Yeah, okay. Just checking.
It'll happen. It'll happen. Though. This week is pretty open. So
yeah, you will find me streaming that this coming weekend at twitch.tv/BrettDuville. I have been taking off the holiday break from that on my weeknights, but I'll be back to play and finish Shenmue over the weekend and then return to Persona 5. So that'll be a lot of fun. You can find the podcast on Twitter at DevGameClub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Thanks so much for listening. Have fun playing games this week and this coming year. And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Helped you justify putting these things in because they told something of the story and the characters, and that's not a bad.
Well, I beg to differ with you, Brett. I beg to differ with you.
Oh, okay.
But the stuff that I'm talking about is bitmap shapes being drawn on the screen in an assembly.
Oh, sure, using like the character set or something like that, right?
Well, that's on a non-Apple II computer. Apple II didn't have a character set you used for graphics. It was a bitmap screen that had a horrible interleaving, so you had to use a lookup table per line. You couldn't calculate. You couldn't really calculate it. It was horrible.
I'm gonna have to take this offline, but I'm like, but I used to do some sort of character set thing with Forth, but that might have just been a layer.
That was that was built in to. If you were doing Forth on an Apple II, you're probably doing it in GraphForth.